Today we are talking with Barry Lynn, the author of Liberty from All Masters, The New American Autocracy versus the Will of the People. Barry also has written two other books, and he is also founder and director of Open Markets Institute in Washington, D.C., which is a growing think tank in the sphere of understanding how the corporations and monopolies evolve. But welcome to Redera.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be on.
Fascinating title, and for those who may or may not understand how serious this subject is and how it does touch all of us, but we may never recognize it, tell us a little bit about the central theme of the book. Why this book, and what is this book about?
Yeah, there's really just two main themes in the book, and one is to help people fully understand the threats that are posed by today's monopolists, and by that I mean especially Google, Facebook, and Amazon, but also companies like Walmart and Citibank and the Wall Street financial corporations. Just to understand that these, when we look around and we see all these crises in our world, we see fires and we see COVID-19, this global pandemic, and we see a failing healthcare system, and we see the collapse of small businesses. This was taking place before COVID, and we see sort of this dysfunction in our politics, and we see a collapse of journalism, of all of the sources of news that we've relied on for so many years, that there's actually a through line. There's a single problem that we can point at, and that is the overthrow of our traditional system of fighting monopoly back 30 years ago. So the good news is that, the bad news is that we have all of these massive problems. The good news is that we actually have an explanation for it, and the explanation actually points to a solution. It gives us the direction that we need to figure out how to fix this problem, and not just knock down, not just neutralize and knock down the great threats that we face today, but also to build a far better democracy than we had before. So there's two parts here. It's just see the threat, really understand the threat that monopoly poses, but also see the sword, see the tools that we have to fight them and with which we are going to win.
Most people may not even realize how dangerous the monopolies can be. And in the book, you go at a great length, going back almost 300 years, how the monopolies were existing even then and how dangerous they were for society then. Give us a little bit of historical perspective of how the monopolies were created early on through the royal charters and then eventually how we dealt with it.
Yeah, and this is actually an important thing. It's part of history that every American, should understand, and a lot of people actually do understand. And it's, that our Declaration of Independence, it wasn't just a Declaration of Independence from the British Crown. It was also a Declaration of Independence from the British trading system, and especially sort of mercantilist corporations like the British East India Company. And we said, you know what? We, the people who sort of grow crops and make things, and then the people who buy those crops and buy the products that other people make, we don't need a corporation in between us governing how we make our markets, how we interact, how we exchange. So we said we will not have a corporation, an intermediary corporation. And so that was a fundamental part of the rebellion in the United States, was against corporate control over our commerce and over our lives. And part of what was the threat that people saw, we saw this right in our own lands. And this is why we had the Boston Tea Party. But when we looked around the world, what was happening is that people were able to look and see what the British East India Company had done to India, to the people who live in South Asia, and to see how the British East India Company had killed thousands, tens of thousands of people, had destroyed societies, had bankrupted rich towns and rich provinces, had destroyed the ability of people to grow crops. So what people had saw right at the beginning of this country was that these kind of top-down command and control trading corporations, British East India Company, today we might call it Amazon or Google, that these systems of command and control, of micromanagement, that they are fantastically destructive of society, of our politics. They threaten our democracy. They threaten our individual liberties. So the fight that we are fighting today, it's almost a direct line, a through line from the fight that we were fighting back with the British East India Company 250 years ago.
We had a American system of liberty, and that obviously has changed and evolved. But there were certain foundations, there were certain principles that Jefferson and Madison and others had all kind of thought about and put in place. Tell us what were those founding principles or the founding fathers' wishes and guidance, and how the subject word was scratched out to replace with citizen.
Yeah, and it's a fundamentally important part of our history that we have kind of lost contact with, we've just sort of lost the traces that bring us back to our true origins. And the idea was that, and actually this story when Jefferson was writing the Declaration of Independence, and he read at one point, this is an early draft, he wrote, "We, the subjects of the United States," and then he scratched out the word subjects. He just kind of almost violently scratched out this word subjects, and then he painted it over with white paint, and then on top of that he wrote the word citizens. And this is key. This is key for understanding, what it is that we want to see in our society, because a subject exists below the government. A citizen, however, is part of government. A subject petitions power. A citizen is grants power. So do we see ourselves as subjects or do we see ourselves as citizens is of fundamental importance. And once we said we're going to be citizens, we're going to see ourselves as citizens, it led to a whole set of decisions about how we were going to structure our political economy. And, it wasn't just the British East India Company that we didn't want to have. We didn't want to have domestic corporations. So Americans, for 100 years, more than 100 years after the founding, we had very, very few corporations in this country. And those corporations were we kept very close control over those corporations. But it's like, what kind of independence should each of us have? And the other thing about early America is this idea that we're going to be citizens, it led us to conclude that we have to actually give property. We have to give real property to every citizen. So initially the idea was we would give everybody 160 acres. And this goes back to the late 18th century, goes back to 1785, 1789. We're going to give every free citizen 160 acres so that they can live independent. So that vision of independence within a democracy, living as citizens who are completely equal with everyone else, that was a radical vision in the 18th century. And you know what? Compared to what we have today, it's a radical vision today. So if we actually go back to the vision that we had at the founding of this country, and we embrace that, and we use those tools, and we use those principles, we will find ourselves in a vastly better place than we are today.
That radical vision of citizenship by design basically was rooted in one simple thought that those who are independent in finance and monetary terms are also the ones who can be trusted with the decision making of the politics and thereby the political economy.
Yeah, there's this. It was a vision of property-based independence, and the idea was that if you live on someone else's property, if you depend on someone else's approval to get by every day, you're not truly independent. You actually have to go and basically essentially show some deference to your boss. So this was a vision of a society in which there really were no bosses. We wanted there to be, everybody would have the ability to live on a property that made them fully and completely independent. Now it's important, and this is something I understand very well. My dad grew up as a sharecropper. He grew up in near Tampa in a place called Plant City, and my dad grew up. It was land that his family didn't own, and they raised strawberries, and then they had to split the strawberry crop with the people who actually owned the land. And so this idea of property-based independence is something I understand very well. And it's something that Americans understood very well. Now, and it's really important. It's really important that we understand, that we say something. Here is like there's, this Jefferson and Madison. They did so their writings are remarkably, fantastically, fundamentally important for Americans to understand how our country works, how it was designed. But we also have to understand this was not a gift. This system was not a gift to us by sort of these these aristocrats of the 18th century. When they were writing this stuff up, there were working people. There were soldiers who were in the room with them. There were working people and soldiers who were down the hall, in the hall outside the rooms. There were working people and there were soldiers and there were free black people who were standing in the plazas and in the streets outside. And all the pressure from all of these people affected what they did. This wasn't, some people say the system was built just for the rich. And it's like, no, the people were part of the process from the very beginning. And after that first generation, long before that first generation had actually died off, the people had taken control of these tools and said, these are our tools, and we're going to use them in our way. And we're going to make, ourselves more free, and we're going to improve our democracy every day. And that's what we saw over the course of 200 years. And these tools are, these are the tools that poor white folks use to get a full share of the American dream. These were the same tools that freed slaves, that black citizens after the Civil War used to get a full share. It took way too long, but these were the tools that they used. These were the tools that the women of the United States used to say, "Hey, we are absolutely equal, and we're going to have that equality. We will have the same liberty. We will have the same rights." But it was these tools that they used. So it's important for us to understand that this is not a gift to us by these slave-owning aristocrats. This is a set of tools that we, the people, have shaped from the very beginning, and that we, the people, used for 200 years until the neoliberals came along and tricked us into letting go.
Monopolies have existed for a long period of time with us, but there's inherent conflict between the liberty and the masters. Unless you have the concentration of capital, you cannot have the kind of progress that you need to build a bridge or to build the railroad system or build the other things that you need to defend the nation. And yet, at the same time, when there's a concentration in the economic terms, it always leads to greater concentration, which metastasizes and then eventually starts influencing or supplants the political process. So give us some of the examples, even how railroads benefited from the Rule 166, Rule 160, meaning 160 acres that were given away.
Yeah, the railroads is, we know that there were periods in our country, exactly as you said, when the monopolists sort of came up and kind of took over parts of our lives. And, the first time, that we really, as a people, had found ourselves dealing with something that we didn't recognize, some kind of a new power. It was the railroads and the telegraph corporations, because these were the first modern networks that we had in our society. And it was a network that connected people over long distances, allowed people to send their thoughts to one another, across thousands of miles, or to travel swiftly across thousands of miles. And this was a radical change. So what happened is that we saw a bunch of people sort of exploit this new power to concentrate power in the railroad, or especially to concentrate power in corporations that had some kind of sway over the railroads. This is Standard Oil, Carnegie Steel. These corporations rose to absolute power by leveraging the power of the railroad. But what happened is the American people, we learned how to take the same principles, the principles that we'd established at the very beginning of the country, and apply them to the new technologies. And that's actually what it's, in some ways, that's our challenge today. Is here we are in a new world, in a world that looks entirely new. The world of Google, Facebook, and Amazon looks radically different than the world of 50 years ago. It is radically different technologically, but the fundamental actions of human beings using the tool of the corporation, using the tool of corporate control, sort of manipulating individuals, manipulating markets. The way these corporations and these people who run these corporations act today, it's exactly analogous to how the lords of the railroad era acted 100, 120 years ago. So our lesson today is that we actually need to take these, do what people did 100 years ago, and update these original principles so that we can actually master Google, Facebook, Amazon,
And maybe Walmart.
and maybe Walmart. I put it a little bit further down the line because, in terms of they pose a lot of threats. They pose a lot of social threats. That corporation, they pose a lot of economic threats. It's a very damaging construct. It's a very damaging concentration of power in the middle of our political economy. It damages our society. It damages our, the ability of people to make things. It drives down wages. But compared to, Google, Facebook, and Amazon pose direct and existential threats to our democracy. They pose direct and existential threats to, to the republic. So we kind of sift, kind of separate out the threats. We say we have to deal with the most direct threats, and that's Google, Facebook, and Amazon. And once we're done with that, we'll start to think about how to restructure the rest of the political economy to ensure that we have a society that functions, that serves everybody's interests, and that allows us to bring forth the sort of ideas and technologies that will allow us to overcome the threats, the many threats in the natural world that we face today. Because the world's not in good shape, but we as human beings have the power to fix these things. We just have to free ourselves to do so.
In the book, you explain very well that there are stages of monopoly, and those of us who do not understand how monopoly evolves and becomes so absolute, give us a little bit of an overview of what are the stages of monopoly, and then how does the price discrimination comes in, and then we'll talk a little bit about the common carrier law, how that was created and why it was created.
Yeah, and it's important for people to understand that these different stages, because for 200 years in this country, from the founding until like the early days of the Reagan administration, we basically did competition policy. We did anti-monopoly policy in a certain way. We said, hey, the purpose of these laws is to protect our liberty as individuals from concentrated power. The purpose of these laws is to protect our democracy and our democratic institutions from concentrated power. The purpose of these laws is to protect our communities from people wielding concentrated power from far away. We want communities to be run by the people in them. And then what happened in the early days of the Reagan era is they said, hey, we're going to change all that. We have a whole new plan here. And the plan is, we're going to, rather than serving the interest of the citizen, we're going to serve the interest of the consumer by promoting efficiency in our political economy. And what they really meant is what we're going to do is we're going to allow giant corporations to form, or people to create giant corporations in the name of efficiency, but really just to concentrate power. So this radical change took place in the early 1980s. And then over the next, 20, 25 years, we saw a complete restructuring of the political economy in the United States. We went from having most farms being small and independent to having giant farms and corporate control over farming. That was not true in 1979. It was true by 2005, 2008. We went from having most of the retail economy controlled by individual families running independent stores and independent insurance agencies and independent gas stations and independent restaurants. That was how things were organized in, say, 1980. That by 2005, corporations had taken over, had become the dominant actors in all of these areas. They had sort of displaced, they had appropriated the businesses of the individual independent families. So, and then we saw the rise of these super giants. 1980, Walmart is small. 2005, Walmart is dominant. 1980, Citibank is just one of many banks, not a problem. 2005, it's a dominant corporation. So we see this throughout our political economy, this radical change that takes place between 1980 and 2005, 2007. And that's stage one. Now, stage two, which we can talk about in a little more detail as we go along, is then what happens is we see the rise of the online networks, the online platform monopolies, Google, Facebook, and Amazon foremost. But also Uber and there's some others, but those three are especially powerful, especially dangerous. So the change that we see sort of beginning about 10 or 12 years ago, we enter a second stage. And these corporations, Google, Facebook, and Amazon, start to threaten the powers of the monopolist of the first generation. So suddenly you find Rupert Murdoch, the head of News Corp, afraid of Google and Facebook. You find Walmart to be afraid of Amazon. You find Citibank to be afraid of the new online monopolists, because these new online monopolists, they have far greater powers, far greater reach, far more intimate relationships with the individual. So what we're seeing right now is the second stage is this pyramiding of power as Google, Facebook, and Amazon capture control over the corporations of the first generation of monopolists. So that's one of the reasons why this is such a fantastically dangerous moment is, when you have a Rupert Murdoch afraid of someone else, that's a dangerous moment in our republic.
The man so powerful who almost owned and controlled the party, he himself is afraid of a platform.
Exactly. And so this is why people have to wake up right now about this. And we have to figure out who are the most, there are dangers, and then there are extreme dangers. We face extreme dangers today. It's Google, Facebook, and Amazon. We have to we have to take care of those. We know how to do that, and then we will turn our attention to making a better democracy for everybody.
Let's take examples, each one, Google, Amazon, and the Facebook, how they wield the power and how they can influence and affect you in ways that an individual may or may not realize. Give us an example of as you explained in the book, your friend Nick Thompson, what happened to him?
When you control, what Google, Facebook, and Amazon they have a license. And the license is that they can treat every single seller, everyone who has something to say on the internet, everyone who has something to sell on the internet. Right now, those corporations are de facto free to treat each person differently, to choose who gets to go to market, who gets to talk, and to whom. So another way of looking at this is that they are manipulating who we do business with. They're manipulating who we're speaking with. They're manipulating how we interact. And if they don't like, if you actually cause them grief, they can shut you down. They can shut you down suddenly, completely, absolutely. And we saw this. It was in the front pages of many of our newspapers back in 2014 when Amazon just shut down sales by one of the largest book publishers in America, Hachette. It's actually a French conglomerate, but they have a major role in American publishing. And Amazon, it was negotiating with Hachette. They wanted to bend Hachette to their will, and they shut him down. They said, "We're not selling your books." Now, if the corner store says, "I'm not going to handle Hachette books for whatever reason," that's not a threat to the Republic. But when the dominant seller of books, Amazon, says, "We're not going to sell your books," and when the corporation that is responsible for selling 50, 60, 70, 80%, 90%, 100% of certain types of books, when that corporation says, "We're not handling you," that in many cases is a death sentence. So that's the kind of power that Google, Facebook, and Amazon have. They have the ability to be judge, to be jury, to be executioner. And they're also the people who inherit your property after they've executed you. So they have an interest in killing you. Now, we've seen this also with, we've seen this many times with journalism. I mean, a lot of the journalism in the United States, journalists, reporters, editors are afraid of going against Google, Facebook, and Amazon, especially Google and Facebook, because they're afraid that Google and Facebook will shut them down. And they've seen it. It's happened. There was the case that you're talking about, Wired magazine. They put a story out about Facebook, and it was on their cover. And it was actually, in many ways, it was a positive story. But the people at Facebook didn't like the way the story read. And pretty much at the point that article came out, Wired was cut off from Facebook for a month. There was just no traffic from Facebook. You just couldn't really discover. It became very difficult to discover Wired, through Facebook. So it was a huge amount of their traffic, a huge amount of their advertising, such as it was, and and that was so the idea that these corporations will retaliate, the idea that these corporations will vanish you. It's been, we've seen this more than once. And everyone knows that power is theirs to use at the moment that they choose.
And how does the price discrimination plays a role with someone like Amazon, that you and I may think that we are looking at the same product, but we may be seeing at different prices, and how all that plays into the benefit of someone as strong and successful as Amazon?
Yeah, and this is actually going back to you're talking about how this goes back 300 years. It actually goes back. Modern democracy, we can really trace back 400 years, and it goes back to the 1623 in England, in Britain. Actually back then it was really just England, and there was they called it the Parliament of Monopolies. And what happened back then is that what they wanted was to establish rule of law. They wanted to make sure that the king was not able to give favors to who he wanted, or to punish who he wanted when he wanted. So they wanted to restrict the king's ability to give away
Royal
properties,
patents.
to take properties, royal patents, exactly. So this goes back 400 years. Now, why is this important? Why is this action to take away from the king this arbitrary power important? Because what it means is this is the establishment of rule of law. It means that if you build a business, somebody can't come and steal it. It means that if you build a business and you need to ride a ferry boat to get to market, you get to ride that ferry boat. That the ferry boat captain can't stop you. It means that you have equal access to the market that everybody else has. That's what rule of law means: protection of your property, protection of your access. 400 years ago now, 400 years ago, in England, we said this is going to be the foundation of democracy, and that was the base on which we have built modern democracies here in America, in Europe, around the world. Rule of law. Without rule of law, you do not have security of liberty. You do not have security of property. You do not have secure foundation on which to build a democracy. Everyone is afraid of some power, and that means everyone kowtows to that power. So when it came, this rule of law, this is, we talked before about railroads. So what we learned in America, and this goes, is that, well, if the railroad, has this ability to carry who it will to market. They could say, you get to ride today and you don't. Or they could say it a different way. They could say, well, you both get to ride today, but for you the price is 10, and for you the price is 50. And then, and which is a way of saying that the person that they're giving the price of 50, they're saying, you essentially don't get to ride today. Now that means that the railroad corporation has the ability to take someone's property, to destroy someone's property, to extort money from people to get to market. That means that we don't have rule of law. That means that the corporation is law, that the men who run the corporation are the law. So there's only two options ultimately in society. Either it's rule of man, somebody is your boss, somebody tells you exactly what you get to do, or you have rule of law, which means equal access all the time. So what we did is we created a set of laws. That means you get equal access, equal treatment, equal pricing. For any time there's a network, everyone gets, you pay the same rate to go the same distance, and there's no favoritism. It's all out there in public. And that's, sometimes we call those common carrier laws. That means that, and so that, when it comes to dealing with powerful network corporations, essential services like communications and transportation, is the foundation. That's how we carry rule of law into the political economy. And what we've seen, we just have to be honest about this, what we've seen with Google, Facebook, and Amazon is the destruction of rule of law. They make law. They are the law. They choose to do what they will. They can make you or they can destroy you. And if they make you today, they're going to destroy you tomorrow. So we're now sort of going back, not just to 1776, we're going back to 1623 to relearn in our country, in our societies, what is the foundation of democracy? What is the foundation of liberty? It is rule of law. And that's what we have to reestablish when it comes to Google, Facebook, and Amazon. And the way to do that is just to say, you charge everybody the same price for the same service all the time. And this is true for the buyer, but it's also true, and this is most importantly, for the seller. You charge everybody the same price for the same service. It seems simple. It's what we grew up with, but it's not the way these corporations operate now.
Let me kind of clarify some of the things you said, which may not be that apparent to a casual listener. So what you're saying is, when we had the railroad, when we had the electrical wires, meaning electricity, and when we had the telephone wires, which is the communication, or you have a gas station, you go to a public utility company or your local utility, and it doesn't matter who you are, we are all given the same price. 10 cents or 30 cents per kilowatt hours, or $2 or $3 a gallon for the gasoline. And it doesn't matter whether you drive into your Mercedes or you drive into your Toyota, the price is same. It doesn't matter whether you are a man, woman, or of what color you are, everybody is given the same price. But that doesn't seem to happen on internet. On internet, the people, meaning the bosses like Amazon, have the right to show you different price to different people, and also take different share of their profit from the sellers, which is even bigger problem. Is that correct?
Yes, that is absolutely correct. That was beautifully stated. And what we see with, and this is especially important, when it comes to the seller. I mean, we don't want to get ripped off. It's like if we're, if I'm going to buy an N95 mask on Amazon, I don't want Amazon to say, well, this person is like, really afraid of COVID, and so they're not very careful with money, or they're very desperate. So I'm going to charge them $10 for this mask. And then the next person, they say, well, this person is a really good shopper. they're actually not that careful about. They don't really care that much about Amazon, and I mean about COVID. And you can learn all this because you're reading their emails. You can learn all this because you're studying what the people do all the time. You can learn all this because people buy the data from banks, and so we don't want Amazon to say, well, we're going to charge the first person $10 for a mask, and we're going to charge the second person $2 for a mask. That would be unfair. But that's actually less dangerous than the fact that they are doing the same thing for the people selling the masks, for the people who are selling books, for the people who are selling detergent. And what they're saying is that to these people every day is like, well, if you want to get to market today, yesterday it cost you 10, but today it's going to cost you 30. Tomorrow, I don't know, maybe 50. And if you don't actually pay, then we're going to give that slot to someone else. We're going to promote someone else's product and not yours, and you're going to suffer.
Or what we can do is that we will find where you make your product, we'll make it and come up with our own generic brand and sell it instead of you, or put it right next to you at a cheaper price.
Exactly. They're going to steal your business. They're going to steal your business straight up after studying it. Because remember, every single interaction that takes place on their platform, they know everything about that interaction. They know how long your cursor hovered over the buy button. So they're gathering all this information. They're storing all this information in their immense server farms. And then they're using this information to manipulate you, to manipulate the sellers, and often just to steal the business of the sellers. So, this goes back again, like this is what the problem was in 1623 at the beginning of democracy in Europe. And it was like, rule of law, how do we establish it? And right now, when Amazon can steal pretty much anybody's business that they want, when they can extort anybody they want to get to market, when they can manipulate the flow of information between the reporter and the voter, that ain't rule of law. That is a pathway towards a type of autocracy that looks a whole lot like what we saw in the Soviet Union, or in some ways even more dangerous, what we're seeing emerge now in China.
So this is how we get here. We have very smart people who are very successful. They come up with a very good product, which helps a lot of people in America. And now things get a little bit more complicated because online, once you start using a product, you're also sharing a lot of information, which is generally called data. Now the data is in the hands of the corporations, and these corporations know exactly what you're doing with your money, with your mind, with your keyboard. So now once they own you, they really own you.
Once they own you, they really own you. Because at a certain point, the information you're going to be getting actually it restricts your ability to escape. And this is actually one of the things that people sometimes forget is like one of the reasons like public pricing is so important. When you have to post a price, when you say, a gallon of gasoline is $2.25, or a gallon of gasoline is $5, and it's posted there, and everyone can see it, and you could actually, drive down the way and choose to like go to some place where it's $4.99, instead, or whatever. It's like, what that does is actually everybody, all the buyers of the gasoline understand, oh my God, well, $2.25, that's not too bad. $5, that's way too expensive. That is outrageous. And then you get together, the people get together, the public comes together and says to the government, fix that. Find us new sources of gasoline, or help us get new cars that use less gasoline so we can drive. There's a lot of different ways you can fix the problem, but it's the price that allows the public to get together and act coherently vis-a-vis the government and say, fix this. Now, when everyone is getting a different price, if you go to the store and you're getting a radically different price than someone else, at a certain point, then what's a high price? What's a low price? Is the general price too high? What is the general price? No one knows, and that means that the public, we, the people, can't come together and to join our forces, join our arms together, and fix what we need to fix. So this is a, one of the things that is so dangerous about this, besides the fact that they are disrupting information flows between reporters and voters, is that they're also increasingly, by destroying the pricing system, they're making it hard for us to process information in our society.
By
We look at,
atomizing it.
yeah, by atomizing us. And that makes it, we look around and the world looks increasingly chaotic. And it is increasingly chaotic. But it's like, is it chaotic because things are spinning out of control, or is it chaotic because people have concentrated power? And actually, that's the paradox of concentration of power. When a few people concentrate power, when the many don't have information, things fall apart. The only way to run a complex society is if everyone is in charge of their own lives. That's the only way we can run the society that we need to run. And if Google, Facebook, and Amazon, with their massive banks of servers, with their artificial intelligence and their algorithms, if they think they can run this for us, all they're going to do is destroy it. They'll destroy it all. And in fact, it's already falling apart. Monopoly is concentration of power. Monopoly, after concentration of power, yields collapse and chaos.
For those who are cynics and listening to you, and they say, what is wrong if someone is very good at what he does and builds a large corporation and provides a lot of services to a lot of people around the country? What's wrong with it? There's nothing wrong with it. If Amazon is giving you a lot of convenience, that you can buy a lot of goods from the convenience of your own home without going anywhere, or if Google can give you all the information you need in few keystrokes, or Facebook can allow people to come together, these are wonderful things to do. What's wrong with it?
There's nothing wrong. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the services, with the new technologies. I love these new technologies. I love being able to buy something with a click of a button. I've been a writer for a long time, and I remember when Google search really emerged around 1999, 2000. I was a very early user, and it was a marvelous tool. And it's still the best. Well, it's also the most dominant search. It's so I still use it every day because it works in many ways for me. And I also have no choice. But so these services, it's okay to like them. In fact, we should like them. We should say, if the fact that we may be moving towards self-driving cars, fantastic. If we get to that point. So embrace the technology. But we have to understand that the technology and the corporate business model are two different things. And we can have all these technologies without having the present business model that Google is using. We can have these technologies without having the present predatory business model of Amazon. We can have these technologies without having the present manipulative, exploitative business model of Facebook. So what we have to address is the business model, not the technology. Technology good, business model bad. Business model makes the technology dangerous. We want to use these technologies. We want to use them safely. We have to fix the business model of Google, Facebook, and Amazon. And that's what anti-monopoly law is for. That's why we developed it over the course of 400 years.
What you're saying is that the state is missing from the commanding heights. That was not the case before the digital age. It's in some ways on the internet, the rule of law is missing, and the monopolists are able to do the price discrimination, provide and gather vast amount of information on all of us. As a result, we are atomized as a buyer or as a seller or as someone to say something, and that gives them added leverage and added power, and then they use that power to influence the political process as well. What can we do going forward?
I mean, I actually just slightly rephrase that question and say, what are we doing now that we can build upon as we go forward? Because, it's important to understand that the fight against these monopolies, the movement to destroy these monopolies and rebuild these monopolies and rebuild our democracy, that fight, that movement is already underway. Truly remarkable changes over the last 4 or 5 years in terms of attitudes on Capitol Hill and Congress and the Senate, and attitudes among the enforcement agencies, and attitudes in Europe. All these these enforcers and the people who study this issue. I mean, frankly, 5 years ago they were oblivious. They were completely out to lunch. They were just entirely asleep, dreaming of a utopia while the world around them was burning. But last 4 or 5 years, everyone has woken up and everyone is beginning to relearn the old tools. So there is stuff that is happening in every state in the United States. Every state in the United States now has an investigation against Google. Almost all the states have an investigation going against Facebook. There's a growing set number of states that are going to be moving against Amazon. The DOJ and the FTC in the in Washington are moving. The Congressman Cicilline in the U.S. House of Representatives sort of oversaw a fantastically important set of hearings and investigation into the power of the tech platforms, and that is going to yield all kinds of information and all kinds of guidance about where we go. The Europeans are sort of really figuring out, how to use their tools to sort of not just tweak these corporations around the edges, but to actually shape their behavior in ways to make them safe. Now, what we have to do is we have to understand the threat. The threat is absolute. It is existential. We have to not despair. We have to look at the folks. Look at the folks who are actually out there fighting this fight, and we have to support them absolutely in this. We have to understand that this is the fight of our time. Now, we're all saying, well, everything that matters, changes come November. Yes, that's part of this, but it's like on the day after the election, no matter who wins, this is the fight of our time. Will we have a democracy? Will we have liberty? It is up to us to decide. So, and that it has to be done now. The fight is engaged. We have to support everyone who is fighting out there. We have to let them know that this is our #1 issue, and we will win. But we really have to concentrate on this and understand that this fight against monopoly is the fight of this age. It is the fight that will determine whether we live in anything, that whether we have a world that collapses or whether we live a good life in a stable and safe and prosperous world,
where we are still the citizens and not the subjects of some arbitrary corporation.
Exactly. It's like, are we the masters, or are they our masters? And once we lose that, their power is such that will remain forevermore, up to the point where they actually just break the entire system. So there's no safety here. There is no safety when we continue down the pathway of the monopolist. There is no out. The only way to safe harbor, the only way to a life that we want to live, is by breaking the power of the monopolist. And we are started that fight. We are beginning to win that fight, but we need everybody supporting it.
For those of us who may not understand the gravity of the situation, here's a quote from the book that I'm reading now. The main difference between Walmart and the other dominant corporations and intermediaries of the last generation and Google, Amazon, and Uber is that today's online giants are able to manipulate individual behavior and decision-making not only on a day-to-day basis, but moment to moment. That much dependent we are.
That's right. I mean, it's like in terms of how far we have fallen as citizens, as sovereign citizens. It's like so much of our lives today, we're really not in control. But we do have this once. This is our last chance to reassert control. It's like we will win. People should be confident of that, but they have to do the work. People have to stand up and do the work. And there's a lot of people that they can support. And actually, if people go to, we have, I run, as you mentioned at the beginning, I run an organization called Open Markets Institute. Open Markets Institute. We were actually created. We were 3 years ago when we were kicked out of another think tank called New America. You could read about it on the front page of the New York Times. There was an article by a reporter named Ken Vogel. You can read that story. We were kicked out of New America because Google wanted us out, because they wanted us silenced. We didn't listen. We were not silenced. We've kept fighting. We've expanded our team. We've expanded our work. And one of the things on our website, you can learn a lot about how to win these battles. What are the tools you can use? And a lot about like the other allies we have. We have there's groups, there's grassroots groups, and there's folks throughout there's policymakers on Capitol Hill. There's all kinds of groups that are fighting this fight. So actually, if you want to learn about this, a really good place to start is our Open Markets Institute website. And then and this book, I think, is in terms of like a guide about how to think about this, what sort of what went wrong in our history. If you want to understand what went wrong and what to do about it, that's what I am hoping to provide people with, and Liberty from All Masters.
Tell us a little bit about how long it took to write the book, or what kind of research you had to go through. How did the book came about together?
The book was, there's two ways you can, whenever you write a book, there's two ways to sort of speak about the timeline of the book. And it's like there's the actual amount of time that you spent writing it, and then there's the amount of time you spent thinking about it or preparing to write it. And it took me about a year to write the book, and that was while sort of having a full-time job. So it could have been a bit faster, perhaps, because I was also running Open Markets Institute. But the work really goes back in some ways to my last book, Cornered, which came out in 2010. So since Cornered was the first book that said, hey, my fellow Americans, we got ourselves a monopoly crisis in this country. And that book, is the foundation on which the anti-monopoly movement that we have now today, it was built on Cornered. So, but since in the 10 years since I wrote Cornered, I've been thinking about what is it that people really most need to know, and what is it that in our history that we need to bring forward and use now. And what I came to understand was the thing that what we needed to know is that we have all the tools. We have every tool we need. We don't need to build it. We don't need a new law. We don't need a new institution. All in our past, we have every tool. We have every experience. We have all the language we need. And so I wanted to bring back this lost history of America, this lost language. This is what the neoliberals overthrew. It was this history, this language. So I wanted to bring this back in full so that people could use this, go reach into it, understand. Understand fully what Milton Friedman and all the other neoliberals, Greenspan and Bork and Posner, that whole crew of folks. What is it that they overthrew, and how did they overthrow it? So we can figure out how to use these tools today.
Thank you. We've been speaking with Barry Lynn, the author of Liberty from All Masters. Thank you very much for your time and your comments.
Hey, thank you very much. It's been great to talk to you.